But what I want us to look at tonight is the actual how we do take down the giant, how we defeat the giants that we face in our life, the Goliaths that we face, and looking at the example of David from that. And so we want to begin with this idea that Saul wants to arm him and equip him and prepare him for battle by putting on his armor, putting Saul's armor on. And of course, David kind of goes along with it up to a point. I wonder even if the armor would have fit, that he probably would have been like, you know what, I've never tested this. I'm not prepared for this. This isn't how I fight. And so he probably would have declined it anyway. But he goes along with Saul and he tries it on and then announces that he can't, since he hasn't tested it, he can't possibly wear that. And so what Saul wants him to do is to fight the battle in his armor. Now, I think there's a temptation for us in the same way to at times we want to fight the battle in somebody else's armor. We want to use what somebody else has done already, what somebody has done for us. That becomes our means of fighting as opposed to fighting on our own behalf. In the power of the Lord, I'm going to wear your armor in order to do that. And so you cannot slay your giant in other people's armor. We start with that. Now, what do you think what would be something that would look like? How could you or somebody in your life attempt to defeat something based on what you have done or who you are? Can you be saved by the fact that your parent is saved? No, that is an act of faith that has to be individual for any other person. In that sense, the armor of somebody else is of no value to me. I shouldn't say it's of no value to me, but it has no saving value to me. In battling against some giant that you have in your life, whatever that might be. And I think the more practical and specific you can be, the better it is as you think through this. You know that maybe your giant is a physical problem that you have. Maybe it's depression, struggle with depression. Maybe it's a sin. You just have a sin that's a giant in your life that you're struggling with, and you can't bring it down as much as you try. So in what way might we attempt to wear somebody else's armor in battling that giant, whatever it might be?
Yeah, what about relying on the prayer chain as
Okay.
opposed to praying yourself?
Okay.
You're relying on other people to pray
Okay.
for you, but you're not actively.
That's good, Jesse. So in terms of prayer, in terms of prayer, there's a sense that we're putting on somebody else's armor when we don't have a prayer life of our own, right? Yeah. Right. And so I put a prayer request out there with no intention of really praying, but I know that I get this all the time. Hey, you got a closer connection with the man upstairs. Would you pray for me, right? So people look at that and they see my armor is of some value to them. Now, there's value in us praying for other people, but we need to be people of prayer ourselves. So I think that's a good example, Jesse. Any other thoughts on that? What it would look like to put on somebody else's armor in order to fight the giant that we face? Shirley?
Somebody else's medication or form of therapy.
Okay.
For somebody else might not work for you.
Okay. So medication, therapy, all those things might a means of treatment might be something that since it worked for you, it might work for me, and so I'm going to put that armor on. I think that's true. How many times have you had somebody who I've told this story before, but I was counseling with somebody and they were struggling with something in their life, and what they said was they were struggling with alcohol, and what they said was they referred back to when they quit smoking. And he said, you know what? I was able to do that, and so I know I'm able to do this. And so his past experience, the way he defeated that particular habit, addiction in his life, was to him, would help him in this new attack. Now, regardless of whether that worked or not, in what way could that be relevant to me struggling with the same addiction as him? He said, what did he do? He said, he basically was like, I can beat this. His mentality was, I got to be strong enough, I got to have the willpower, and that was the way he was going to beat it. And in some way he was successful, at least in the prior endeavor with that. So I could look at some way that somebody has successfully battled against an addiction and say, you know what, I'm gonna do that too, when it might not work for me. Shirley?
The second addiction might be harder to get rid of, and they may falsely think, well, the other was a piece of cake. This was
Yeah.
easy too.
Yeah, that's right. If the one was relatively easy, if that's the right word, to get through, might give us this false confidence that this next one will also be the case. So we can attempt to put on the armor of other people. We can try to use the pastor's spiritual maturity for our own benefit. We can try to gather our parents' experience, their faith in God, and use that in some way to advance ourselves in the battle that we face. But when it comes down to it, this is us, this is you, and the giant that you face. And not that we don't need other people alongside us to help us, but we're not going to be able to win this battle in somebody else's armor. This has to be in our own armor. And so we are not going to be successful in slaying the giant in other people's armor. We also need to slay the giant by pursuing victory, not just survival. Now, what would be the purpose of all of Saul's armor on David? What is the ultimate purpose of that? Protection. Absolutely, it's protection. Really doesn't have much to do with the attack other than it's going to protect me as I advance, right? So armor is purely a defensive mechanism. And so putting on the armor, and we certainly need to, as we see in Ephesians, we need to put on the armor, but we also need to understand this, that there can be a tendency in our life when we're facing a giant to I just want to survive it. I just want to get by. I don't need victory. I don't need to defeat this. I just need to survive that which I'm going through. And so that idea of putting on armor simply as a protective means oftentimes doesn't lead to victory. It doesn't move us and advance us to be victorious over something. We might survive that for a moment. We might get past it for a little bit. And yet God wants us to pursue victory, not just survival. Also, interestingly, he has this sling in his hand, which I assume he brought with him. I don't think he put this together. I think this is with him all the time. In fact, when we think of David at that point in his life, I think we usually think of the sling there hanging on his side. So David, this was something that David carried with him, that was always with him, I'm sure. And so we need to slay our giant with what God has placed in our hand. I think this is oftentimes the case, even though we don't realize it. When God has made it a victory available to us over whatever giant it is that we're facing, He has generally equipped you with everything you need to take down that giant. You probably already have everything that you physically need, everything that you spiritually need to actually defeat the giant that you face. You might not realize that. You might think, if I only had this, if only I had this quality in my life, if I only had this person in my life, I'd be victorious. But I would say this, that in all likelihood, whatever it is you need to take down the giant is already present in your life. Even if it's simply God's Word. You have what you need. And I think there's a really neat verse that corresponds with this, that in in the book of Exodus, chapter 4, when God confronts Moses and is calling him. And Moses is resisting that call. But beginning in verse 1, then Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say the Lord did not appear to you." And so Moses coming up with his excuses. And here's what God says. The Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A staff." Now, did God just at this moment in time place that staff in Moses' hand? Moses has always had that staff, right? Or we assume that as long as he's been working in the fields, that he's carrying the staff. The staff is with him. Now, he doesn't recognize that that's going to be the means by which God is going to demonstrate his power, not simply to Moses, but to the Pharaoh, to the people of Israel. That staff is going to be prominent. And then I think it's interesting that God says to him, "What's that in your hand?" And as if God doesn't know. And Moses said, "Well, it's a staff." That is going to be, that which is in his hand is going to be that which God uses. And think about all the things that Moses used that staff for. Can you think of any? To part the sea. Used it in some ways he wasn't supposed to. Striking the rock. Yeah, but that became prominent in Moses' life. It was the means by which God was going to demonstrate his power to Moses and the world through that which he held in his hand. And so in that same way, that which David needed to take down the giant already was in his hand. Now I want to challenge you that whatever it is the giant you face tonight, and you might think you're lacking in some way, that God is, I'm relatively certain, has already put in your hand whatever it is that you need to be successful. And I would say this too, that maybe the giant is some kind of ministry goal that you have, something I'd like to do on behalf of the Lord. And you're thinking, well, if I only had, I don't know, some more money, if I only had, I was a better speaker, if I was just, if people, if I was charismatic, I don't know, whatever it is we think if only I had this. And I think God would say, well, what is it you have in your hand? What is it that you're already holding? What are the skills and the abilities, the special things that God has given to you? Because that's probably that which you need in order to slay the giant that stands before you. And so I love that image of that which is already in your hand. We also slay the giant by resisting the urge to use the weapons of the world. David or Saul's perspective is that David will be successful, and I'm not sure he's confident in any way that he's going to be successful. But what did Saul think would bring him success, if that was even possible? Yeah, the armor would be the weapons of war. It would be the things that Israel used to battle against the Philistines. That was the weapons of war. That was the things of the world that would be that which would bring victory. And David, when we look at this, and let's look at it practically and logically. And it is that, did David succeed in this battle simply because he was an expert marksman with his slingshot? Do we think that? No. We don't think that. I mean, David didn't think that. David made it very clear that he didn't view victory as something that was going to happen because of his incredible military skill and background. That wasn't what was going to bring victory to him, and he understood that. And so we have this tendency to immediately go to a worldly perspective when we face a giant. Now, what are the worldly perspectives that we lean on in facing giants today? Some of them maybe we don't really want to say. What's that? Glory to yourself. Well, I would say that's an end objective, Mom, but that's not the means by which we are going to, that's not the means by which we're going to attain victory. That'll be maybe our hope as we get to the other side of victory. How does the world view the answer to whatever it is you're facing? Let me give you an example. You're in a really tumultuous marriage relationship. What's the world say? Give up. You're struggling in an addiction. What does the world say? Okay, you're struggling in a pornography addiction. What does the world say? Yeah, it's okay. Give in. Give up, give in. You know, the way that the world fights. In fact, look at let's just jump into my head at the moment. But think about the whole transgender craze that we're going through right now. We look at that and we shake our head. What does the world say is the way to fight gender dysphoria? Give in. Absolutely. Get that surgery. Take those medicines. The world has a means to fight, has an agenda, a way that we battle that's completely different than what God would call us to battle. And so understanding that means that we don't fight in the ways of the world. How do we fight? In God's ways, which if we look at Ephesians chapter 6, beginning of verse 10, it says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil." And then he says this, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over the present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." So when we realize that which we face, and we could go back to the things that we just talked about, whether it's gender dysphoria, whether it's an addiction to pornography, an addiction to drugs, an immoral relationship, whatever it is that we would choose, and we would look at the worldly response to that, from God's perspective, he says that all those things that you're battling, those aren't even with people. It's not even a worldly struggle that you're engaged in. It's a spiritual struggle. It's a war. It's a spiritual war, which completely changes the way we fight. Because what? Because if I'm fighting in a worldly way, that is going to look completely different than if I'm fighting against what I believe to be a spiritual force. If I see a person on the other side, and that's the enemy, I will fight with worldly armor. I'll use my wit, my tact, my strength, my superior intellect. I'll use all those things. But if I recognize that which I'm engaged in right now, the giant that I face is not, it's not a person, this is a spiritual battle, then those weapons that I need are different, right? In fact, he describes them further on in that, and we see that they aren't the things of the world. It's not the things of the world. And so, in this battle, as it begins, Goliath just starts screaming at things at David, insulting him, insulting Israel, insulting Israel's God. And David doesn't stand for that. David doesn't listen to the voice of the enemy. He doesn't listen to the voice. In fact, he speaks on behalf of God. And I think one of the things that we really struggle with today when we face our giants is that we allow the giant, we allow the enemy to define us. We allow the enemy to say what's true. what we think is true or what the enemy wants us to believe is true. But to successfully slay your giant, you can't allow the enemy to define you. The enemy might say this: you're not smart enough. You're not attractive enough. You're not spiritual enough. You're not strong enough. You're too weak. Shirley?
There's a song out there that says, fear, what's it say? Fear is a liar.
Oh, yeah,
Fear is a
yeah.
liar.
Yes, fear is a liar, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right. So all the enemy always wants to convince us that we're not enough. Now we need to understand this. In ourselves, in David's self, he wasn't enough. But he understood that. And so we don't allow the enemy to define us. But how often when we're in this depressed state do we begin to believe that which the enemy says about us? I am messed up. I am just a broken, messed up individual, and the enemy's perfectly correct in the way he's describing. That's what we fall into. We need to begin to make sure that we see that we are not as the enemy describes us. David was not as the enemy described him. Now, if that's true, and I think you would all agree that that's true, that the enemy does not get to define us, who gets to define us? God does. And if God defines us, then what does he say about us? What has God said about you that defines you? You're loved? You're chosen? You're fearfully and wonderfully made? You have a purpose?
Created in his image.
Say that again, Joey.
Created in his image.
Created in his image? Yep. Yeah, all those things. You're his child, right? All of those things. Those are the things that God has used to describe you. And when the enemy is attacking you, as Goliath is attacking David, is coming forward with David, he is throwing out these other things. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? He's cursing him. He's saying all these things, and David might be tempted to believe that. But he doesn't. Because he believes he is defined by what God has said, not what the enemy has said. I really think that we oftentimes lose when we lose at this point. When we get to this point, where instead of allowing God to define us, instead of believing what God said about me and the things that you guys all just everything was just so perfect, instead of believing those things, we immediately believe I'm too sinful, I'm not skilled, I'm too dumb, whatever. I have no talent, I have nothing to offer. And when we begin to believe those things as opposed to the things that God has said about us, and then we become defensive. Then we lose our confidence. We're not ready to battle as intended. And so we slay our giant by not allowing the enemy to define us. We also slay our giant in the strength of the Lord. This is what David says. He goes through this description of how he's going to battle. And so it's going to be in the strength of the Lord. And so this counteracts that which we just looked at. We're going to fight. We're not going to fight in our own strength. We're not going to fight in the ways of the world. We're going to fight in the strength of the Lord. Now, what does that practically mean, though? What would that look like? If I am fighting, and I'm fighting against my giant, to fight it in the strength of the Lord would mean what? That's one of those really, really Christian, biblical sounding things, but we start thinking of it practically, we're like, man, I'm not even sure what that would look like if that happened.
You're giving up your thoughts and what you think you can do and turning it over to the Lord.
Okay. So you really kind of implied there, Shirley, trust, I think. Trust. Fighting in the strength of the Lord is trusting in Him as opposed to my own ability or my own skills. I think that's good. Any other thoughts? Alex?
Going at it like we got this, not I got
Okay. Okay.
this. Me and God.
Okay. So Alex said instead of approaching this from I got this, it's we got this, in the sense that God is fighting with me. God is going along with me in the battle, as opposed to I'm doing this on my own. Anything else? How do you fight in the strength of the Lord? How have you fought in the strength of the Lord at different points in your life? Prayer. Absolutely. Anything else?
Just pray for Him to direct your steps and like direct your path, and just tune into your Bible and see like how He speaks to you, and just like be quiet and listen to see where He wants you to go and how He wants you to move.
Okay, so praying, even specifically praying for direction from God. Show me the steps to take. Show me the direction that you. I mean, if David would have rushed out there without any thought of waiting on God's direction or inclination that might come from the Lord, he may have walked into a hornet's nest. But waiting to hear from the Lord. In Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6, it says, "Then he said to me, this is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts." This is a great verse to live by. This is one of those good, highlight this Bible verse, put this on your bathroom mirror. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. And so whatever it is that we face every day, we're going to walk into that thinking, I got to have enough might, I got to have enough power. But God reminds us that it is by His Spirit that we will be victorious. We also slay our giant with faith, and faith in the power of God. So David has incredible faith. In fact, I always get a little nervous when we venture into this kind of area, because we can look at this and say, oh man, if I had enough faith, I could take down any giant that stands before me. And maybe there's some truth in that, but sometimes the giant is what? It's like cancer. It's a loss of a loved one. It is something that is just insurmountable, in the sense that my faith isn't going to keep this from happening. This has happened. And so sometimes, I don't want to say faith is not enough, because faith is always enough, but it isn't like faith always brings down the giant, at least not literally. Maybe in a more spiritual sense, it is always true. But David has faith. Now, where does his faith originate from? I can't speak to that. I don't know why or how he had such ultimate confidence to walk against that giant. But he speaks of that. He speaks of faith, that he believed that God was going to deliver that giant to him. So he had that faith, and that confidence is what led him to the battlefield to take that giant down. And whatever way God had spoke to him, informed him, this is your giant, you're going to take him down. But faith was a part of that. And so believing that God is actually going to deliver me in this situation. And so whatever the giant might be, faith plays that incredible role in bringing that about. Louis Giglio, in Goliath Must Fall, said, our change is more about trusting and less about trying. It isn't that you're not trying hard enough when you struggle with that addiction. It's not that you're not trying hard enough when this problem just keeps coming back. It ultimately comes back to trusting. It is that I'm trusting God to deliver me. It's not that I haven't given my best effort. It's that I have not completely given this over to God. I haven't trusted God with whatever it is that I face. And so our change is more about trusting and less about trying. And so we come down to something that Mom kind of brought up just a little bit ago, and it is David's motivation. What is his motivation for this to happen? And the same thing then goes along with whatever your giant is. So let's speculate that there's somebody here tonight and their addiction is alcohol. And ultimately your motivation, and don't think that if you speak up that means you're confessing to that. But if that's the struggle, if your struggle is, man, I've been having trouble with alcohol all my life and it's just bringing ruin to my life, what's your motivation to get away from it? Be honest. What would be, or let's think of it not for you, but somebody else in your life. What is the motivation to get away from alcoholism, pornography, drugs? What's the motivation? Shirley?
It might be to hold on to your family.
It could be to hold on to your family. Could be to save your life, right? Keep your job. There's all kinds of things that could end up being your motivation. And so in this battle with David, and I think here's where we oftentimes get into trouble when we're facing our giants, is that in the battle, our agenda, our motivation, our goal is one of those things. But ultimately, in David's battle against Goliath, what is his motivation? It's God's glory. It's that God would be known, that God would be made famous. And so our motivation for slaying the giant must always be a zealous concern for God's glory. So if we are a follower of Jesus and we are struggling in an addiction, part of our concern, part of our worry in that should be anyway, God's glory, right? If I'm as a pastor and I'm struggling in some kind of addiction, I hope that part of my concern would be, man, if this gets out, what is this going to do to the church and to the Lord's name? I mean, I would hope that would be part of my thinking. And so our motivation usually in these giant areas are our health, our well-being, our family, but really at the bottom, our greatest motivation should always be God's glory. And so that even if you got a child who's sick and you don't know what's going to happen with your kid and you're worried and you just want them healed, but even this there should be this element that my prayers are that God, you would make yourself known, that you would make yourself famous through the circumstances of my life, whatever they might be. And I think that's probably part of David. Even with David, man, there seems to be this confidence that Goliath was going to fail. But even underneath that is this attitude that even if he doesn't succeed, he's going to defend God. He's going to make God known. He is fighting for God's glory. Ultimately, is what's most important to him. He's not so concerned about Israel as he is God's glory and God's fame. And so our motivation should always, in slaying the giant, should always be a zealous concern for God's glory. And so interspersed in this story is the enticement offered by Saul for the person that defeats the giant, right? And what was the enticement? It was one of our quiz questions. What were the enticing things? Riches. The daughter, Saul's daughter for his wife. Another one? I can't hear you, Rob. Yeah, that's right. Be a free person. Those are the three things that he named off as being available. And so is there any clue in this? Is there any moment in this story that would indicate that was of motivation to David at all? Never. There's never a point where that seems to be a concern, even though it's brought up a couple times in the story that this was offered to whoever it is that would take down Goliath. And so that obviously is not a motivating factor. Now, I want you to personalize that. I want you to think about your desire in taking down a giant in your life. And what is it? Are there tangible rewards that are available to you if you're successful in taking this giant down? Okay, your health. Could be. There could be. We're not looking at somebody offering us, hey, I'm going to give you this money if you defeat this giant. We can't look at it in that way. But when we slay a giant, there could be some tangible benefit to our life as a result of that. And as Fred said, your health. When I think about ministry, and I have to consider this, and any of you who've ever maybe spoke publicly, you might look in your life and think, I'd love to be able to speak. I'd love to be able to teach, but I couldn't get up in front of people if my life depended on it. No way I'd be able to stand up on a stage in front of other people. And for you, that would be a giant, right? That would be like, there's no way. There's no way I can do that. No way I can take that down. So, but what would be if that giant was slain on your behalf, what might be a tangible benefit that would come from that?
Your confidence in yourself would increase. Your confidence in yourself.
Okay, your confidence in yourself.
You encourage others.
You encourage others, but I'm looking at something that's personal to you. Jacob, this applies to you very, very specifically, in that what is the tangible benefit of accomplishing the mission that you believe God has called you to?
Save lives.
Got a job, exactly. Thank you, Kathy. The pastor doesn't recognize that, but at least you. So yeah, exactly. And not only that, I mean, that's just a kind of an easy example. But you know what? When you stand up here and you preach, people say nice things about you. That feels good, right? There can be an element of kind of pride that comes out of that. And so sometimes slaying the giant can put us in a place where there's some rewards that come along with that. But this is the case that we see with David and what needs to be with us. And it is that in slaying our giant, God's glory must always take priority over whatever other available rewards. For me, as a pastor, and I feel incredibly blessed to pastor this church. I love the opportunity to preach. I am so blessed and encouraged when people encourage me, but I have to be careful because that could become that which keeps me coming back. I don't want to quit preaching because I'm not going to get those attaboys. I'm not going to get those pats on the back any longer. And so that becomes my motivation. That becomes the reason that I go forward to continue what I'm doing. I mean, here I am contemplating retirement and working on a plan for that in the next few years. And so I look at that and I think, well, I want to keep doing this for a little while. But if at any point this becomes about just because I like doing it or because I need the money or it makes me feel good, if any of those things take a priority over God's glory, then I'm in a very dangerous place. We slay our giants ultimately with God's glory in mind. That needs to be what's most important. Now, if